Welcome, everyone. Vice Mayor and council members, I call this special meeting of the Albany City Council for October 21st, 2024 to order. City Clerk, can you call roll, please?
Councilmember Hanson Romero.
Here.
Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
Councilmember Tiedemann.
Here.
Vice Mayor Lopez.
Here.
And Mayor Mickey.
Here. Today's special meeting will be around a study session on Golden Gate Fields. Staff, may we have your report?
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Leslie Mendez. I'm the Planning and Building Manager in Community Development, and I'm joined virtually with Director Jeff Bond as well as Interim Finance Director Raina Schwartz. So tonight's presentation is on Golden Gate Fields. On July 16, 2023, Golden Gate Fields announced it would be ending its operation as a horse racing track. The last races were held in June of this year. While the transition of Golden Gate Fields will be primarily driven by the property owners, the city appreciates this opportunity that has potential to provide long-term benefits for our community. Staff has prepared this presentation to review site history, current status, conditions and constraints, as well as review potential direction of next steps for reuse of Golden Gate Fields. Golden Gate Fields is an approximately 135-acre site comprised of two parcels bound by Buchanan Street to the north, Gilman Street to the south, the I-80-580 to the east, and the Bay Trail and the San Francisco Bay to the west. The McLaughlin East Shore State Park and the Albany Bulb properties are located just to the north of the site. The larger parcel, which is approximately 107 acres, is located within the city of Albany and primarily consists of the racetrack itself, the grandstands, and the parking lot. The approximately 28-acre parcel to the south, which is located in the city of Berkeley, primarily consists of what were the stables. Although access to the site is available from Buchanan Street, the primary vehicle access that serviced the property was from Gilman Street through the city of Berkeley. Historically, the Albany shoreline was located east of Golden Gate Fields. Fleming Point, in what is today a portion of the footprint of the grandstands, was once an island separated from the East Bay shoreline by a large salt marsh, fed by Cerrito and Cordonices creeks. The general area was home to the Ohlone people, and although unknown, the site may likely contain archaeological resources and/or be classified as a cultural resource. The area was used for cattle ranching from the 1950s to the 1970s and a dynamite and chemical factory from the 1870s through the early 20th century. By the early 1900s, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad Company had acquired most of the land along the waterfront, and in 1938 leased about 130 acres to the Golden Gate Turf Club to create the Golden Gate Fields racetrack. The Turf Club graded Fleming Point from its original height of 105 feet down to 60 feet, using the earth and rock as fill for the track and the grandstands. The inaugural races took place on February 1st of 1941. However, with the onset of World War II, the United States Navy took over the site for the Naval Landing Force Equipment Depot for storing hundreds of landing craft destined for the use in the Pacific Theater. After the war, Golden Gate Fields resumed horse racing. The racetrack changed ownership a few times, and the Stronach Group, the current owners, did purchase the fields on July 3rd of 2011. The site has a general plan land use designation of commercial recreation and a waterfront commercial zoning district which conditionally allows limited uses, including park and recreational facilities, utilities, bars and restaurants, commercial recreation and entertainment, marinas and boat launching ramps, non-residential parking facilities, and waterfront sports and waterfront sports-related commercial sales and services. In 1990, the Albany voters passed Measure C, which requires that any zoning or general plan amendment be approved by ballot measure by a majority of the voters. Since passage of the ballot measure, the city has seen a few concepts for redevelopment for the site. In 1994, the City Council placed a ballot measure and voters approved a gaming card room at Golden Gate Fields. However, a court later invalidated the measure for failure to comply with CEQA requirements. In 2001, Magma Entertainment proposed Rancho San Antonio, a 650,000 square foot retail, commercial, and entertainment development. However, the project was withdrawn before action was taken by the city. In 2005, the Sierra Club provided a concept of open space for the site. However, no formal proposal was made. In 2006, Caruso Affiliated, a large Southern California retail and mixed-use real estate developer, in partnership with Magna Entertainment, began the process of applying to the city for development of an 800,000 square foot retail shopping center in the north parking lot. The concept would have retained the racetrack. However, it was withdrawn after the pre-development agreement was not approved by City Council. Beginning in 2008, the City Council approved a consulting contract with Fern Tiger Associates to undertake an extensive community engagement process entitled Voices to Vision to determine the community's vision for the Albany portion of Golden Gate Fields. The report arrived at a consensus concept that provided for development of 26% of the site that could include uses such as hotels, restaurants, bars, a conference center, retail, and various public amenities. The concept also included 75 acres of open space that incorporated a 300 to 1,000 foot open space setback from the shoreline. The final report was accepted by the City Council on April 1st of 2010. However, due to Measure C, it was not adopted as a formal city policy. And finally, in 2011, the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab issued a request for proposals for the site to develop a large-scale second campus for additional research facilities that could not be accommodated on their main campus. The Stronach Group did prepare a proposal that included 2.6 million square feet of offices and laboratory. However, the lab ultimately selected a university-owned site in Richmond as their preferred location. However, that ultimately was canceled as well by the lab. As we move forward, any future reuse or development of the site will need to take into account the site's unique characteristics and constraints. As mentioned, Cordonesis Creek runs along the eastern edge of the Golden Gate Fields property next to the I-80 from the Berkeley-Albany border into a salt marsh at Buchanan Street. Cordonesis Creek is important both from an ecological perspective and from a flood control perspective. It should be anticipated that a larger creek corridor will be required to accommodate ecological restoration as well as flood control improvements. In addition to city regulations, which are limited by Measure C, other agencies, including FEMA, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife have regulatory authority over the creek. Future use of the site must also take into consideration sea level rise. Modeling indicates that sea level rise will begin to significantly impact the property at 36 inches of rise, with inundation first occurring on the north side and moving south as sea level rise increases. Ultimately, the only area that is not predicted to be impacted would be the area that was once a standalone island, which encompasses the land area from Grandstands westwards towards Fleming Point. Additional challenges are the limited infrastructure located on the site. The existing sewer and storm drain infrastructure is old and limitedly dispersed. Currently, the City of Berkeley portion of the site is being serviced by a City of Albany sewer lines, and it is expected that all underground infrastructure such as sewer, Storm drains, water service, and electrical services will need to be upgraded or realigned and replaced. The site also presents challenges for redevelopment due to its lack of connectivity with the rest of the city. The site is essentially cut off from the city by the I-80 580, with the only access from Gilman Street in Berkeley and from Buchanan Street in Albany. And while both those ways do have pedestrian pathways to the site, they wouldn't be considered necessarily pedestrian friendly because both require crossing on-ramps or off-ramps to get to the site. Additionally, the site is not serviced by any public transportation. The nearest bus stops are at Solano Avenue and San Pablo Avenue in Albany, and Gilman and 6 in Gilman in Berkeley. If future reuse of the site envisions housing or community uses, connectivity will need to be addressed. And Golden Gate Fields is within the city limits of both Albany and Berkeley, as noted. And although land use regulation is discrete within each jurisdiction, and any future development or reuse of the site can be pursued independently due to the past history, current status, and site constraints, it would behoove any property owner, future developer, as well as the cities ourselves, to work collaboratively, if not in coordination, with one another for maximum efficacy and public benefit for future use. In addition to our two jurisdictions, any physical changes to the property will involve coordination with a number of other government agencies and utilities at the regional, state, and federal level, including those involved with development of parkland, the waterfront, the creeks and marsh, utilities, transportation, and transit agencies. East Bay Parks is particularly important as a potential long-term partner in the development and operation of open space. Another consideration of redevelopment and reuse are the financial impacts. While in operation, Golden Gate Fields generated approximately $1.5 million annually in revenue for the city, which is not an insubstantial sum. This included approximately $500,000 to the general fund and approximately $1 million in special revenues, including emergency medical services, sidewalk parcel tax, sewer fund, storm drain, and streets assessments. Additionally, Golden Gate Fields did contribute $700,000 annually, approximately, to the Albany School District. It is anticipated that the city will see a $200,000 decline this fiscal year due to sales tax and wagering taxes no longer being generated by people attending events at the track. Franchise and utility user taxes, which are calculated as a percentage of the cost of utilities, will also decline this current fiscal year as use of the utilities declines. Finally, impact to public safety services from service calls to police and fire is unknown to balance kind of the service required to monitor a vacant lot as opposed to the ongoing operations of the racetrack. As we look towards the future, several considerations will contribute to the long-term fiscal impacts. One is ownership. If future ownership of the site is a non-taxable entity, such as state parks or the UC, revenue to the city and the school district will remain low. Second is the land use mix. Both revenues and service costs of various land uses can vary significantly. Land uses that generate higher revenues and generate fewer demands on local services may be desirable from a fiscal perspective, but may not be appropriate for this location. Alternatively, large public recreation and open space areas can be an enormous community benefit, but would create long-term fiscal challenges as service costs would increase without the associated revenue generation. It is difficult to predict how redevelopment of Golden Gate Fields will evolve. To date, there has been no significant proposal presented to city staff since the closure was announced. Several pathways do exist on how future development of the site could occur, and we expect all of those pathways to involve a certain degree of community engagement, interagency coordination, environmental analysis, identifying funding sources for city and school district services, as well as infrastructure and open space improvements for the site. If sold to a public agency, most of the processes and decision-making would fall outside the city's purview, though we would anticipate a certain degree of coordination to occur. Any use of the site related to the agency's purview would not be subject to a ballot measure, and the degree of community input the agency would seek would likely be minimal. It is also possible that a private entity independently submit a ballot measure for reuse. This could range from a 100% open space proposal from an organization like the Sierra Club, or an intensive mixed-use development similar to the California concept, California Forever concept that was proposed but then removed for the Bay Delta. If such a measure were to be presented to the voters and ultimately passed, community engagement opportunities would also be minimal. As opposed to placing their own measure on the ballot, a private entity could also submit an application to the city for coordination and processing, including placing the proposal as a measure on the ballot. Although this option would provide greater opportunity for community involvement, both the city and the community would be essentially reacting to a proposal, not creating it. Proactive alternative would be for the city to spearhead a comprehensive planning initiative to guide future redevelopment, similar to what was undertaken a decade and a half ago in the Voices to Vision process. This could take the form of an updated waterfront element of the general plan. The community would be tasked with envisioning general plan and rezoning amendments to adopt policies and standards for future development, to modernize open space requirements, and incorporate sea level rise and wetland protection measures. A city-led initiative would maximize community involvement and be most likely to guide and balance future use of the site for the benefit for the city as a whole. To achieve this impact and guidance, however, a ballot measure must be approved by the voters. Most expediently would be a measure on the ballot to return zoning and general plan amendment authority back to the City Council, similar to Measure N1 in 2016 that returned some zoning authority back to City Council from the previously passed Measure D. This option would allow the planning of the waterfront to be processed similar to any other general plan or specific plan. Alternatively, the city could move forward with a planning initiative which is brought to the voters once completed. While this pathway would include the same level of community engagement, it does run the risk of defeat at the ballot after the work has been done. With either process, a city-led initiative places the future envisioning of the waterfront in the hands of the community and the council. That actually concludes my presentation. And though no action is required at this time, staff is available for questions and is looking forward to inviting just your thoughts from the council as well as the public on the future of Golden Bay Fields. Thank you.
Thank you, staff, for presenting. And I want to reiterate that this is truly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us as a city and as individuals to have the opportunity to create a vision for the future of the waterfront. And with that, I'll turn to council members for questions.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. In talking to people about the situation, the question has come up, what the state have latitude to build out there if the state were to purchase the property? Housing has come up, and so maybe to put a point on the question, could the state partner with another entity to build housing out there? And if it did so, would it be subject to local control or not?
So we do have our attorney in the room, but I'm going to answer and then she can correct me. If the state agency is building something that is under their purview, the city would not have any jurisdiction over that site or that process. So if the UC were to come and build dorms, which is a type of housing, obviously, or lab or classrooms, we as a city would not have any say. If the university, however, is like, well, we would like a shopping mall to go with those dorms, that portion would be subject to city purview since it it is not under the actual purview of UC to operate a shopping mall. So similar with other agencies, if it was open parks, if the parks were to purchase the property or to gain control of the property and do development related to restrooms or community centers, a visitor center, we would have no official say. We would hope that they would ask for our coordination and input. However, if the parks, again, unlikely decided like we want to do maybe housing for employees would be okay, but if they were wanting to do senior housing or housing for school teachers, that would not be under their purview, and we would have some say.
A follow-up to that question. So thank you for the clarification. Were UC to lead a housing development down there? State law recently changed also to allow state surplus land to be developed as housing, regardless of whether or not it is actually zoned for housing. Be a little strange if you were to buy the land and then suddenly call it state surplus land, but in that scenario, would the city have any say on the housing development?
If it were declared surplus land, and again, I don't know what the process is for that.
Declared surplus land usually gets offered up to certain public agencies for purchase. So if it is a public agency who purchases it and it's a state agency, then the same things Leslie just described would apply. But if it then passes that and gets sold to a private developer for housing, then I would think that we would have the jurisdiction back in our hands.
Okay, thank you.
So is it that if it declares a surplus, then the state can build housing on it? I don't understand. If they declare a surplus, they have to offer it for sale, so I'm...
Correct. And then usually other state or local agencies have first chance at purchasing the property. However, private entities also have the opportunity to bid on the property. And the highest and best use is often what it is sold for. But to me, that is an end around to someone being able to build housing out there. Because it was at one point state surplus land, and now it is now privately owned, and by state law, housing could be built there.
So if I understand the state law, once it's declared state surplus land, no matter who buys it next, that designation carries with it under this law. So they would have full latitude.
I will, to be clear, I have not read the actual in-depth language of the law. However, what I remember from it was state surplus land provides the opportunity for housing to be built on, regardless of whether or not the city had zoned it. So in other words, when it goes from state land to now private land, it had never been zoned, and as such, housing is now an allowed use.
Yeah, I would like to read that. I don't know if you have the bill number or...
I will look up the bill number,
Okay.
and I'll make sure that I send it to staff and it's distributed to City Council.
Thanks. So to return, yeah, you raised a good distinction with the American Campus Communities, which is the new building on University Village, UC property. That was not subject to local control because it was under the educational mission. So even though it's a private for-profit company, I guess because of the public-private partnership, it didn't fall under our control. So UC can essentially do private-public partnerships and basically build whatever it wants as long, or have the private partner build whatever it wants as long as it's part of the educational mission
On their land, on UC land, yes.
on their land. So it would have to be their land. Are there other instances of, are there other similar situations in state law like that for housing or for anything? I guess you mentioned if the park district were to buy it, then it would have latitude to build housing for their workforce.
Yes, and or something like concessions. If there was like a concessionaire, that's sort of a private-public partnership that would be subject to the jurisdiction of the park, similar to what you would find in a national park.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I found the reference I was looking for. So I was referencing the Surplus Land Act, Government Code 54220 through 54234, aims to make local public land that is no longer needed for government purposes available for building affordable housing. Sorry, affordable homes. It says not housing. So,
Do you have the number again? What's the starting?
54-2020, and it's the Surplus Land Act.
That's in the government code, or?
That is part of HCD for state of California.
That is part of the government code.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Looking to other council members, any other questions?
So far, do we know if anyone else has put forth any sort of interest in what kind of communication have we had with the owners? And
I will let the city manager talk about communication with the owners. Staff has received inquiries about different development, but they weren't, they were more like tentative inquiries or starting inquiries for different corporations, mainly related to housing. Not actual proposals, just questions at this point.
I believe members of the council have seen some of the conversations in the media and whatnot with some interest expressed by the state for purchase of the property. My understanding of that conversation to date is it still remains ongoing. Nothing substantive to report as of yet. The city does remain in close conversation with Golden Gate Fields representatives, both on site and removed from the site, but serving to look for opportunities going forward.
Any questions on this side? Just wanted to mention, staff, so this is not a question, but it's not a discussion item, but just before public comment. One other item I would note for cooperation in the future would be Amtrak. So Amtrak station is, well, sorry, Amtrak runs lines in close proximity to the waterfront. And so, and I know Amtrak had been discussing and planning for future infill stations, and Albany was one that had been considered in the past. I don't know if it's still under consideration. And then the only other thing I would add is with the new Gilman Street overpass at the south side of the property, pedestrian and bicycle connection is better in that you don't have to cross highway off-ramps. However, I wouldn't say it's the easiest. It is better than it was. And I don't have any other questions, so not seeing any other, oh, go ahead.
sorry, one more thing, because when you brought that up, I also, next to the railroads down there, it's also, there's the gas pipeline that's also running across there, and I don't know how that would impact that, the connectivity to that area as well.
Oh, and sorry, Councilmember Hanson-Romero, with your comment, it reminded me also, you sit on the GPA for Tom Bates Fields, and so that would be another organization that we would want to coordinate with, the Tom Bates Regional Sports Fields, which is a joint powers agreement between 5 communities, Richmond, El Cerrito, Albany, Berkeley, and Emeryville, that run and maintain the sports fields down at just south of Gilman.
Thank you for that reminder.
All right, and with that, thank you. We'll open up, I guess, for public comment. Can I get a raise of hands just to get a sense of how many people in the room are here for public comment? Okay. And online, how many do we have? Okay, so we'll go with 3 minutes each. Yeah, we'll start with the room.
Good evening, council, mayor, staff. Well, this is an interesting time, actually. We've been involved in this process for anticipating parkland out on the waterfront for about 40 years. In the 1980s, when I had an opportunity to serve, we were dealing with this. In 1985, an organization called Citizens for East Shore Parks was created, largely by a number of environmental organizations and environmentalists and community members who wanted to see a better use of the waterfront. And the discussion in those days was very rarely do you get a redo, and we were facing the opportunity to get a redo to repurpose the shoreline for public access and recreation. Heretofore, at that time, it had been used for industrial uses and polluted in large measure. So it was an opportunity for us to revisit the subject. The plan that city staff put up on the screen talks about what had happened and the various different players. The Sierra Club plan was actually a Citizens for East Shore Parks plan. The Sierra Club is part of Citizens for East Shore Parks, and we work closely with the Sierra Club, Golden Gate Audubon, CNPS, the California Native Plant Society, and a number of other local, regional organizations to put that plan together. And the reason I bring that up is because the presentation here didn't mention the fact that this site is directly in the middle of the McLaughlin East Shore State Park, a state park that runs from the Bay Bridge all the way up into Richmond, Point Isabel. And it is a prime site to complete the park. About the conversation about housing, it's a terrible site to put housing. With 2 meters in sea rise, the infield and the approach to the infield are all underwater, as is the I-80 breached just north of Albany, and the Tom Bates Field would be threatened. And when you look at what NOAA is talking about within possibly by the end of the century, we might be looking at 10 feet of sea rise. And with sea rise comes the water table comes up from underneath, and seawater being heavier will push water up even higher. So this is a bad site for that. In addition, according to the state bill by Senator Laird, we have to do a regional planning process to talk about how we're going to deal with sea rise and to deal with putting natural solutions first. The best idea for this is to allow it to become incorporated into the McLaughlin East Shore State Park. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Oops. Yes. Good evening, Norman LaForce. On behalf of the Sierra Club, I am been the Sierra Club leader for 40 some odd years with regard to the creation of the McLaughlin East Shore State Park, going back to the days when Santa Fe wanted to build its 4 million square feet of development. I also serve on the 3-chapter state committee called Bay Alive, dealing with what's going to have to be required of every agency with regard to complying with the regional shoreline adaptation plans. Sierra Club has always advocated that this should be part of the East Shore State Park. That's what we think it should be. We put together a plan actually to show that this could be created as a resilient shoreline, which would protect the actual hardscape of the city to the east of the site. And this is exactly in line with what is being proposed as being requirements of every jurisdiction under the Regional Shoreline Adaptation Plans, BCDC. That hearing for BCDC was held just the other day. And this agency, is going to have to prepare a regional adaptation shoreline plan. And in that plan, one of the criteria is that you're going to have to plan for a 7-foot, 2 meter sea level rise as one of your alternatives. That's mandated, okay? And under the mapping that's been done, virtually the entire site is going to be inundated with that 2 meter sea level rise. So this results in the need for this city to figure out how it's going to prepare a regional adaptation plan to deal with that issue. Moreover, that the BCDC criteria require jurisdictions to work with interconnectedness, so that Albany just can't put forward a plan that says, well, we'll build X number of high rises out there on stilts and let everybody else can go away, okay? No, you're going to have to work with Berkeley. You're going to have to work with the Park District. You're going to have to work with all the other agencies along the shoreline, because anything that's done with seawalls to protect anything out there from this 2 meter sea level rise is going to cause destruction by wave action to the McLaughlin East Shore State Park and adjoining properties to the north and south. So right now, as Bob Chasty has stated, the best thing is just to deal with it as it is and and go forward next with what you're going to have to do under the regional shoreline adaptation plan. Because anything else that's proposed will not be, probably not be approved. And the BCDC criteria mandate that you have to put nature first, natural solutions first as a priority. So look forward to a great resilient shoreline. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Hi, my name is Brian Martin. I just had a couple of comments and a question. One thing, just skimming the beginning of the packet, it seemed that several efforts over the years that the city had of trying to make changes there were thwarted by, I don't know about irregularities, but like mistakes or things that it didn't dot every I and cross every T. So, you know, clearly there's whatever the city tries to put together will need a lot of scrutiny to make sure it stands up to whatever challenges that there are. Whatever goes in there, the city, I would hope, would ensure that new adequate water and sewer lines are installed where there are now none. This would hopefully also provide those services to the Albany bulb. And then a question I had is, maybe it was mentioned, but it wasn't clear, is if a buyer comes forward and submits plans that the city approves of, and say the city wants to put a ballot measure on that would allow a new use that's not currently allowed, which is my understanding of the process. It seems like if that was going to happen today, you'd have to wait till 2026 for a ballot measure to put on, so a 2-year delay or something. And my question is, can the city hold a special election at a time more of its choosing for this? Is that a possibility? Thanks.
Thank you for your comments.
Good evening. I'm Francesco Papalia. I'm a member of the Albany Financial Advisory Committee, and I'm particularly sensitive as a member and a representative of the electorate to understand what the financial impact of this would be. And there were a couple of, there's that number of the $1.5 million for the taxes, which seems to me a imprecise number. I'd like to find out exactly how you came about with that number. There are actual tax records that these entities pay. And so as we put forth that information, I would like to see exact numbers down to the dollar, not to the penny, but to the dollar, because everybody gets a tax bill. I get a tax bill. I know I have to pay it. Any of you who have tax bills, you have to pay it. It's very specific. And I tried calculating that as part of my presentation to the City Council, to the Financial Advisory Committee, and I came up with a much higher number, closer to 2 million. And so I'd like to get the parcel numbers and the tax records for each one so we know that you aren't leaving out any parcels that are owned by the entity that now owns it and would be selling. The other thing is I'd like to get a number for the cost of the Fern Tiger presentation or that happened. It would be very interesting, particularly now in hindsight, how much money was spent for that we did, and is it all for naught, or it was a decision that was made back then. And also the other thing I want to remind the council and the public is that this is what I would call a greatly underutilized commercial entity for the city of Albany. We have very, very little land, and it would be nice to know exactly what percentage of this is our entire commercially zoned areas, because if this goes, it will be the end. There'll be very little left for us to develop. And what I really want to emphasize is any loss that has occurred from this must be paid on the backs of the property owners of this town, which are already dealing with yearly new taxes. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Anyone else in the room?
I just had a question. You mentioned $700,000 for the Albany School District, and I was curious if that was money that was going straight to the district, because I have other sources saying the high school wasn't really benefiting from any money from the state, from the fields, and I'm just wondering if that source was wrong. Yeah.
We'll answer questions at the end.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Go ahead, Jeremiah.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. I hear a lot of suggestions about people's ideas about the use for the land or facilities. But I don't hear anybody talk about the reason why there's options now for use of the facilities and the land. That's because there was a victim back in 2020, victims of Golden Gate Fields employees alleged all that's the reason why Golden Gate Fields is shut down. So I think we need to focus on that. And the first thing that should go up is a resource center in honor of Jane Doe, a victim center to where victims can go that need help. I mean, if anybody learns anything, you got to do what's right before you move forward on your idea and what you want. You got to go where the need is. That's why I bring food. But the need is a resource center. And I don't hear anybody talking about that. So before moving forward, has anybody reached out to Jane Doe and asked what Jane Doe wants to do with Golden Gate Fields? Because all these parks and all this fun stuff, bars to drink alcohol, that's the reason why Golden Gate Fields was shut down in the first place. Because allegedly her drink was spiked. Alcohol. Now you want to bring alcohol back. I don't know. I think if you're going to do anything, you need to honor and fix what's right with the victims of Golden Gate Fields. That's only the right thing to do.
Thank you for your comments.
I know there's been mention of housing, and I know that people have mentioned the barriers to that because of the sea rise, but I think that housing should be the first priority. We, as somebody pointed out, we have really limited land in Albany. This is an amazing opportunity to build some housing that's truly affordable for people who would like to live in Albany and can't afford the prices of the housing as it is now. I think that we could do that in partnership with organizations or businesses. I don't know all the logistics. I just know that I think that should be the top priority It's nice to have recreational land. It's nice to have a pretty place to go. But if you don't have a place to live that's affordable and that is where you want to be living, and people are being priced out of Albany. So I would like very much for us to push for housing. And I'm concerned that there'll be another outreach to the community asking them what they would like. And I think that people who are safely housed are not going to say that there should be more housing. So I hope that will be taken into consideration. And yes, anyway, I think it's very important. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Hi, this is Amy Smolens. Just want to clarify active transportation access to the waterfront. There is an underpass, and there's been that for 15 years or so. There's an underpass under the freeway on-ramp for pedestrians and cycling access. Obviously, if staff wasn't aware of this, then we clearly need signage to show people that there is access. And I daily point that out when I'm going under the underpass and there's someone trying to cross the freeway. Shout to them and show them where it is. We also need more formalized pedestrian path and steps for that access because it's pretty rocky. And then in general, I hope that after this process, again, because we've done it before, we end up with something that'll benefit Albany financially, which we desperately, desperately need, as well as providing services and amenities for residents and visitors. Remember that recreational facilities can be revenue sources such as watercraft rental, bike rental, and then associated services and businesses. When you travel along the Bay Trail, you see Berkeley, Emeryville, and Richmond marinas all have a lot more activity, and that can be accomplished while still taking sea level rise into account. And I do agree with Julie before that, sure, housing is really important if it can be done safely and with transit connections, like hopefully additional AC transit runs. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
That's all.
Thank you. Thank you for all those who provided comments. I'm going to attempt to go back and direct questions. Let's see. There was a question from the public about whether or not there would be the possibility of holding a special election regarding Golden Gate Fields.
I think that would be possible.
Thank you. There was a request for more information about a tax bill down to the dollar. I'm going to guess that that's something we might be able to do as follow-up. There was a question about the cost of the Fern Tiger efforts, as opposed to just Fern Tiger was hired multiple times. I don't know if that's something that staff has on hand now or something that we could follow up with.
We can follow up with that.
Thank you. There was a question about funding, so the $700,000 and whether that went to AOSD or how that made its way to AOSD.
Sure. In the staff report, that was taken directly from the 2023-24 parcel tax bills. We will be coordinating on that further, including the economic analysis for the city to make sure all of those numbers are affirmed collectively across the agencies.
The question was specifically, though, whether or not that money went straight to the school district, and my understanding is yes. Okay. If we could get clarification, there was a conversation about a 2020 victim. If there's anything that we can say on that item.
I don't think it's germane to this study session.
Okay, thank you. And then I will just note, I will go back and perhaps address some of the other comments that were raised. I have some follow-up questions, if that's okay, for those who raised some points. I will note that the underpass on the Buchanan Street, there are definitely improvements that could be done there. However, I feel that is not, while the underpass is good, you still have to cross a off-ramp on the other side of 80. So definitely could be improvements there. It's not quite as, it is not at the same safety level at which the Gilman Street overpass is in terms of removing as many conflicts as possible for pedestrians and bicyclists. Right. I I did have a question for Norman LaFleur. You mentioned a 7-foot rise for BCDC is asking communities to look at 2-meter rise. In what time frame is BCD asking cities to analyze that? So they're saying cities should prepare for 2 meters of sea level rise. Is that a 20-year horizon? Is that a 50-year horizon? Or is it,
The 2-meter sea level rise is what's projected for 2100 based on current assumptions about global warming, which you can take or disregard, okay? However, what BCDC has put into its criteria is that based upon the state's Ocean Protection Council, the Ocean Protection Council has stated that jurisdictions need to plan for now that 2-meter sea level rise. And what BCDC has stated in its criteria for the regional shoreline adaptation plans is that any adaptation plan that you put together, there has to be an alternative that addresses the 2-meter sea level rise. It can't be ignored. So for example, San Francisco is going to do its plan under the RSAP based upon a 7-foot to 2-meter sea level rise. So it's coming. That's what the criteria are within the RSAP that BCDC is going to be approving probably in November, because it has to do it by December 31st.
Thank you. With that, I'll open it up for council, either if you have any comments regarding public input, or if there's individual discussion you'd like to have.
Of course. First, I want to thank Joel Irvis, if I'm pronouncing the last name correctly. He sent an email to the council with years' worth of engaging with the state. So I appreciate that, and got some engagement with the state. So I just want to recognize the effort that was made there, and he coordinated a letter from, I don't know, maybe 100 people in Albany to the state. I'm dubious about the city focusing and funding any planning effort around this. So I moved here 30 years ago, which I'm realizing is now half my lifetime, and almost that entire time, the Golden Gate Fields was going to close in 5 years, much that entire time. Now it has closed, so what happened? I'm dubious about, is something going to happen fast now all of a sudden? I am dubious about that. In addition, it was raised the question about the money that the city spent in 2010 on a visioning effort, and there was a first phase of that effort, which was not Fern Tiger. It was, I think, Don Newworth was the name of the consultants, and that was approximately $200,000, a little less, as I recall. Fern Tiger was a little less than $700,000. You add staff time, and it was easily $1 million. And that was to end up with something that is not any kind of binding plan, and that's $1 million in 2010 dollars. So I don't see wanting to do that again, personally. That does not seem like a good use of city funds. Of course, the flip side is, well, then we're reactive, but right now in terms of local control or zoning is fairly restrictive. So I think to the extent that a project comes forward that is under the city's jurisdiction, we have, I would say, a lot of control, a lot of power to negotiate for what we want. So it's not going to be reactive in the sense of, we have to react within 2 months. We can take our time with it, or some future council can take its time with it, because I suspect it's going to be a future council. I don't think it's going to happen quickly. It was raised that the example of the Berkeley waterfront was raised as being a revenue generator, and as an example of what Albany could achieve out there. Well, there's articles in Berkeley side regularly that Berkeley waterfront is not self-sustaining. It's $100 million in the hole in terms of keeping up with capital spending to maintain the facilities. so it is not a revenue generator. I'm very concerned about sea level rise. It's been mentioned 2 meters of rise is what ECDC is requiring waterfront jurisdictions to plan to. That doesn't take into account storm surge, which, yes, not like Florida, but BCDC does have tables for storm surge. And I think if there is some sort of commercial or housing development there, then the city is putting itself at risk of higher cost for services if that area starts to flood. I'm not really interested in building Florida out there. I think we have the opportunity not to build Florida out there. As far as the idea of putting residences out there, particularly for households that have low incomes, I'm concerned that would be to continue inequity because it would be putting those households in really the riskiest part of Albany in terms of climate change. And the general sense is climate change is happening faster than pretty much most of the models predicted at this point. So I don't think it would be wise to take 2 meters as the 100-year number and say, okay, we can plan to that. Again, I think that would put the city at risk of being on the hook for some, substantial services that would have to be provided when that area floods periodically.
Thank you for your input. Councilmember Hanson Romero.
Yeah, I appreciate those comments, and I agree. The one question that does come up to me, and as you've been mentioning, 5 years, 5 years, 5 years, and now it's gone, and nothing's going to happen very quickly in any sort of direction, I feel. But within that time frame, from it's now closed, it's now not generating any revenue at all to us currently, correct?
We still receive some partial tax.
Okay, so I just want to clarify those kind of things. But in the meantime, what might be some temporary uses that would be an opportunity for us? Nothing permanent there, but what could potentially this land be used for temporarily to generate some more revenue to the city while we're not operating a racetrack?
So the quickest reuse would be a new application for what would be considered an entertainment facility. So if, say, something like Topgolf were to apply, they could move in by right. So I think that would be what would consider mostly temporary, because they could move in by right. The other uses, if it was a change of use, the ones that are allowed in the waterfront district do require a use permit approval. So that could be a temporary use as well, and that could expand to things like bars and restaurants and parking facilities. Parking facilities would probably be an easier bet than a bar and a restaurant, but someone could reuse the existing. There was a restaurant there, could reuse it and open a restaurant and have that going as well. So anything that is currently on the list, the zoning list of allowable uses, would be a viable temporary use that would not need to go to the voters for approval.
And we would have the jurisdiction to approve those things.
We would have the jurisdiction to do a new use permit, and anything that was a continuation of the existing uses has already been approved, so it would just be a transfer of the existing entitlement.
Okay, thank you for that. And so, I know that Foodie Land has been down there, and some car shows or stuff like that, so that all could still continue to take place.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you. And thank you to staff for the presentation. I think it is well-timed and also very appreciative to go through the whole history here and kind of understand what's happening. I think that my general feeling is that voice of division is still a good thing to go on, if that's what the community, when we last were able to talk about this, agreed on, of a certain amount for open space and a certain amount of some sort of development. But it's been a long time since we did that. So my ideal for Golden Gate Fields is that we have a chance to have a community conversation about it no matter who buys it. We need a partner who's bought it to do that. Unfortunately, we do have to be reactive to some extent. But I think this is very much on people's minds, even people who didn't join us tonight, even though I appreciate everyone joining us. I think all of us have gotten questions about this when we're out in the community. And I often get the question of what's happening with Golden Gate Fields, and then there's often the follow-up of, it's a lot of land, could there be housing out there? And that may or may not be the right choice, but I think there needs to be, ideally, some chance for the community to have input there. To me, it seems like I don't know if a full court press going through a community process, like Councilmember Jordan mentioned, is the right move right now because we need that partner. In the interim, though, it seems like we could start moving towards putting the power for zoning back to the city council, which I think could be beneficial for finding that partner. As I understand it right now, there's a lot of negotiation going on for who could buy it. And the number that the possible buyers want to pay for that and the number that the family that owns Golden Gate Fields and has decided to shut it down, there's a difference between those. And part of that is due to us having restrictive zoning on it. And so if we were to take that power back into the council and not give them carte blanche of, you can do whatever you want no matter what, but saying, look, we want something to happen here that is not a racetrack. We know that. And we are willing to talk about it with whoever ends up owning this. That could encourage something to happen sooner rather than it sitting fallow for 10 years. I don't want that to happen. I know it's not going to happen fast. This is by the comparison of large projects around the Bay, this is pretty small. It's a tenth of the size of Alameda Point, but it's still a pretty big thing and it's going to take a while. But I don't want to take that long. I definitely don't want it to sit around forever because I think this is a chance to talk about what we could have out there. On the, what to do with it, I think there's a lot of different possibilities. People have floated a bunch of different things. The first thing that was mentioned to me when the news hit that it was closing was, could it be a new home for the Oakland A's? I think that ship has definitely sailed. But, there's a lot of different possibilities that could be out there. One of them, I think, is housing that should be on the table to some extent because while a bunch of this sea level rise is going to get, and probably should be wetland to manage that, Fleming's Point won't be underwater. Or I noticed even the Sierra Club concept plan, or the image that we saw earlier, or that I've seen in the Yodeler and whatnot, has some development there screened by some wetland. I think there's a way to figure that out. I don't know exactly what it will end up being. I don't know what the perfect version of that is, but I want us to be able to have that conversation with the community. I think maybe moving towards a 2026 ballot measure to bring that zoning back is sort of the least, we're not putting in so much resources that we're going to get slapped if somebody buys it and they don't consult us, but we're doing something that would allow us to have a little bit more of a ramp up to figuring that out. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Councilmember Tiedemann. Councilmember Lopez.
Thank you for the presentation. Really appreciate it, and thank the colleagues for great talking points and questions, and for community. I think naturally I'd have a lot to say, just given my background, but I also don't want to state or share anything out too prematurely because things are still in limbo, things are still in process. I will say much of what Councilmember Tiedemann just shared, I am very much in agreement with. I will say, though, that if the city were to engage in any type of consultant for work pertaining to what is currently the Golden Gate Fields property, I would be more in line with limiting that to consulting work around how we could manage being more climate resilient. We are in a climate crisis. I feel like every now and then I have to state that very explicitly and clearly, that we have no time to waste when it comes to finding mitigation efforts and resiliency efforts. We're in a time now where we don't have much time to think. We have to find ways in which we adapt, but also finding that balance of maintaining the fiscal health of our community, of our city. It's not lost on me. I got my own children here in the district. My chief of staff will soon be starting school in this district in a couple short years, and 700,000 is not insignificant by any means. And so I do want to be able to entertain opportunities in which we do find creative ways to bring revenue out of that location if possible. But I also recognize and understand, and I hope folks understand that a lot of it is out of our control at this moment. And I think that's where really the line really need to be established, that we could give out all these ideas, but say, for hypothetically, if UC buys the property, kind of what Councilmember Jordan was alluding to, where a certain word I don't want to say publicly, out of luck. And that, so those are things we need to weigh and be prepared as elected leaders in this community, how we are going to adapt, not just to changing climate, but changing ownership potentially, and what that may mean. So all that just to say, I'm excited to see what could happen with the property. I'm excited to see what collaboration would look like across different sectors and interested stakeholders. I am not too particularly thrilled about the idea of entertaining more consultancy work. I think community has spoken several years back, though I also understand that times have changed significantly, even over the last 5 to 10 years. We are also in a housing crisis, and so these are things that are at the forefront of my mind. How do we achieve suitable options for people to live here? Will say, though, if I had it my way, I'd love to have a state-of-the-art art, science, and research center there where we could bring all those stakeholders together and we can live in harmony and find creative ways to streamline funds into the city and provide opportunity to our young people. And that's where it gets to the point where I say, I don't want to say too much because I think it's premature. I think this is just our opportunity as elected here at the dais to, one, hear out what our city staff has presented to us and the hard work that they put in, the effort and the time that they committed to give us this presentation, but also to hear out our community so we know how to best move in terms of representation for them.
Thank you, Councilmember Lopez. Yes, I have lots of comments, so I would prefer that you all, as fellow council members, have an opportunity.
That was the indication, yeah. I wanted to thank Councilmember Hanson Romero. I think the temporary use idea is quite intriguing because that doesn't lock us into any particular future. I don't know if staff, and I don't expect you would have this number at your fingertips, but how much revenue in sales tax does an event like Foodie Land has generated in the past?
I don't know that offhand.
That is, as I say, understandable. But I think that would be of interest, having some numbers like that, so we can explore that. As far as the concept of, I guess what's being termed returning zoning control to the council, it seems to me, with the way things are now, it really puts the council in a driver's seat, in a very fundamental way, because a opponent who wants to develop something is going to have to get something on the ballot and get it passed, and that's probably going to be easier if it comes to the council and negotiates. Now, of course, it could do initiative and go around the council, but if the council's opposed, the likelihood of that succeeding is not nearly as high. Also, I see it as a bit different situation than that with the parking policy, which was set by the voters, and then, as was mentioned with Measure N1, I think it was in 2016, voters returned control of that to the council, and that was in the context of a housing crisis, and I think that was the driver why the voters were willing to do that. I don't know how the voters would feel about this. Obviously, the thing to do would be to put it on the ballot, but I'm just not sure that even if the voters were to return to the council, that would put us in the best negotiating position with regard to a developer.
Thank you, Councilman Jordan. I really appreciate all the public comment that came in today and the discussion here up at the dais. I started this by saying this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us as a community to put a vision forth. And I fully, wholeheartedly believe that. And I think the greatest challenge, there are the two greatest challenges I see for us as a city coming in the future are the climate change, sea level rise, groundwater rise, and our fiscal sustainability. And Golden Gate Fields is kind of at the nexus of the problem of both of those. Should it become publicly owned, we as a community lose $2.2 million. Worse than that, we lose the opportunity of, even if part of that land, if you were to do Voices Division and you say 27 acres are for development, and you were to say, when you do development, that doesn't mean you get 27 acres of building, you'd get about 18 acres where you could build on. If you had 18 acres, that inevitably would lead to more than $2.2 million of tax revenue. If it's just a parking lot, it doesn't. But assuming that someone buys it and builds something on it, because the land would get reassessed, because there would be active uses. But that's fundamentally has the conflict that was raised that with sea level rise and as described by members of the public, a 2-meter rise, 2100, that sounds like a long time away. However, when one looks at the NOAA projections, they talk about 7 feet of what happens when the water gets to 7 feet. And that could be 4 feet of sea level rise, a king tide, and a 100-year storm all happening at one time. Or it could be 2100 when the water is 7 feet higher all the time, right? And so the time frame that we have to work in is not necessarily until 2100. It could be sooner. I'm very appreciative of staff and their presentation today because I think we're laying out to the community the options of what happens if public entity buys it. What happens if there's a private initiative to put something in front, measure in front of the community? What if a private developer buys it? What if the city leads an effort? And I think the Voices Division process got us as a community to a point of understanding that there are possibilities out there. But that was 10 years ago. We all understood climate change was real. However, we now have much better data about what does that really mean. And as a point, part of the reason why I think there's an opportunity for us to do some visioning, whether that's post a measure that is passed, asking to put it back in council's hands, or whether it's through a general plan amendment that we tried to start ahead of time, is that when one looks at 7 feet of sea level rise, one has to understand it's not only Golden Gate Fields that is affected. The vast majority of East Shore Highway is now flooded. Target's parking lot is flooded. There are whole areas of our community along the waterfront that we need to have this conversation about what does this mean. I agree with the council members on the dais who've talked about housing and the dangers of putting housing out there. We are absolutely in a housing crisis. We have been, as a community, in a housing crisis since I arrived here. It just wasn't as in everyone's face as strongly as it is today. And while it sounds like an incredible opportunity to provide a lot of housing out there, again, we come back to the greatest danger being that we might be putting the most the least, we might be placing members of our community in a situation where they are the least capable or able to move, find new housing in a location where they literally could be on an island again. And to that point, I would say I'm not against the idea of us understanding what would it mean to put housing out there. But I am skeptical that a plan can put housing out there, doesn't require complete rebuild of Gilman Interchange and Buchanan Street Interchange to allow the ability to access any development out there. Sorry, I'm kind of getting a little bit ahead of us. But I want to be clear about that. I'm open to having this conversation. I raised this specter of what if someone uses surplus land to get the property and build housing, and I don't raise that because it's likely. It is actually extremely unlikely, but it's not a 0% chance that that could happen. And we are in a place now as a council to be able to work with the community to set forth, even if we don't get to a measure, even if we don't get to something that can be adopted as policy. As the staff report says, anything that we adopt as policy has to have a CEQA associated with it and has to also go to the public. But we could do a process in which we work with the community to understand what are their desires for the waterfront and the area, and have a grounding that should something come in front of us, whether it's a private developer who provides something, whether it's the state proposing a park system, whether it's UC proposing something, the community has set forth items that they would like to see out there. We would have had a conversation about, yes, we're in a housing crisis. Yes, we need housing. What would be the issues? What would be the pros and cons of having housing out there, right? What would be the pros and cons of putting any development out there? And I will second Councilmember Jordan's thanks to Councilmember Hanson Romero, because I believe that both short-term and development that we can, if need be, retreat from the waterfront over time. We could do development out there that is low impact, but is also not permanent. And I will say, housing is one of those things that is very permanent, right? It's very, very permanent. Not actually permanent, but it's very hard to move. So with that, I would just offer that I would be interested in figuring out a way in which we can hold public discussions about what the public is looking for. I don't believe it necessarily needs to be something that absolutely leads to policy. Issue with policy is that leads to CEQA. CEQA is, if you ever see contracts for a planning process, CEQA is the largest grabber of funds, the black hole where funds go to, and for a good reason, right? We have to understand what the impacts are. But anything where we get close to policy will be a big number because we would have to run CEQA, and this is not an easy site to run CEQA on. Sorry, I'm only looking at this side of the council. That's not on purpose. So I guess I'm just laying out there that I would look forward to the opportunity to continue conversations with the community, but understand and set ground rules with the community that this is a hurry up and wait process. As many of you have mentioned, none of this happens without a partner, right? Whether that partner is the state, UC, private development, none of this happens without a partner. We are not a city that is going to magically win, Powerball and have all the money in the world to build what we would like. The infrastructure alone will be a rather large bill. But I think it's important for us as a community to have this conversation, if nothing else, to highlight the financial situation that the city is being put in. Golden Gate Fields could stay with the same owner for the next decade. That will only mean that we as a city have reduced income if that happens. Whether it's the sales tax, franchise, utility tax, all of those taxes will go down. Assessment won't change, but so those are my reasons for really wanting to be able to have a conversation with the public.
I guess I will offer that the first vote I made when I moved to Albany was to vote for a card room, the waterfront. That happened, I think Albany's elections were in April back then, but I'm not sure. I moved here in February of '94, and Albany being Albany, happened to meet a council member within a month. And that council member said, staff is projecting dire finances and we have to do this, we have to do this. So I voted for it. I continue to regret having voted for it. It never happened, and that deficit never materialized. So you've heard me talk about that in more recent times, but because of that experience, and because of recent experiences, because of following the city's finances, I am not going to be one that's going to act precipitously around the threat of finances. I think we need to be very clear about distinguishing between what is the hit to the general fund due to the cessation of operation, and what is the hit that would occur if the land became untaxable. And those are, very different things. And so I think we have to be careful not to conflate those two together. In terms of 2100, if the process to build something out there started now, it would probably be done in what would you guess, Mr. Mayor?
So I'll pretend that there are no lawsuits, and I'll pretend that CEQA and everything, we've gotten past all of that.
Okay.
My experience in seeing developments in the Bay Area is given that unless you're building actually on top of Flaming Point, which I'm not sure about that, but if you're building on anywhere where it's mud flats, my experience is whether you look at Hercules Waterfront, which was fill of marsh, whether you look at even just south of University Avenue where there was some work done, you're going to need to compress that soil and really preload it. And so Hercules Waterfront, they anticipated needing 5 to 6 years of preloading of about 15 feet of dirt on top of the land. Don't know that that's what would apply here, but that's what was needed there. It ended up sitting there for 10 years, and that was more the financial construction cycle. And so now new construction is happening along Hercules Waterfront. Same thing has been happening. I always forget the name of the community in Brisbane. In Brisbane, there is a former landfill which they have been compressing the land for, well, let's see, I had a studio project on that, and they had loaded the land already, and they're still loading the land, and they're just starting construction. So any development that's not happening on pretty stable land, it's going to take, we're not talking about something happening overnight. I mean, at most, they're moving dirt to kind of compress the soil.
Let's say 10 years.
Correct.
To be maybe optimistic, but being optimistic, so that's 2034. So that would be 66 years until 2100. In 2034, the house I'm fortunate to own with my wife will be 107 years old and fine and habitable. Won't have to be torn down. My point here is that 2100 is not the end point for sea level rise. Currently, the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is the highest it's been in the last 3 million years. Even if we hold it at that concentration, we have not begun to see the end of the effects that are going to occur at that concentration. We're in a transient and unstable situation right now. And so I think building something that is good for 66 years is ridiculous, frankly, and counter to just everything about sustainability. I mean, to build buildings that you're going to throw away is crazy. So I'm, again, just very skeptical of something happening out there other than planning for retreat and planning for protection of what we have.
I will just clarify, I was not necessarily anticipating that we would do all construction that would be disposable. Adaptive reuse would absolutely probably be the best and first approach. And 66 years of having a larger Tom Bates field, 66 years of having other amenities for recreation users, I think, could be something worth having.
Yeah, I guess to be clear, I was referring to development as it's usually conceived of as, houses, commercial offices, retail, laboratory space. I mean, something that's really capital intensive. think a recreational complex, maybe that does make sense. I was just talking to my neighbors last night, and they spent, another long day in Pleasanton because that's where the space is to have complexes that are large enough to have softball tournaments. And, they would certainly like to not have to spend the day in Pleasanton most every weekend. I mean, they're happy to do it for their children, but that's where families have to go now for that kind of access.
Staff, you informed us that no decision had to be made tonight, but is there any direction or additional information you would ask of council tonight?
No, thank you. I appreciate all the comments that you've provided, your thoughts, as well as those from the public, so thank you.
Okay. So before we close tonight on this session, I think one of the key things that I wanted to make sure that everyone thought a little bit about was, or to think maybe, to take a step back even from Golden Gate Fields is, to me, Golden Gate Fields highlights a lot of the issues that we as a community will face from now until 2100, right? Whether it's the potential financial issues, or whether it's the housing crisis or the climate change. But having a conversation about Golden Gate Fields opens up the possibility of people thinking freely and openly more about the city of Albany as a whole. And to me, that is one of the things that I have found most beneficial about doing these kinds of processes, not necessarily bounding yourself by the immediate problem we see in front of us, which is what is the future of Golden Gate Fields, but understanding how does Golden Gate Fields, in whatever future we as a community envision, how does that fit into the greater context of East Shore Highway? How does that interface with everything east of the railroad line, where suddenly you are now beyond the major impacts of climate change through 2100? And I think it offers an opportunity to look at the rest of the city in the context of what could and can't, maybe could or shouldn't happen at Golden Gate Fields, and opens that discussion about maybe people being more open to about other things happening within our community in other locations. And so I would offer that to you that, because again, as a council member, I am worried about the long-term financial stability of our community. And I will say that the last few councils have done an incredible job finding ways of increasing our tax revenue without necessarily increasing the burden on any individual to an extreme. But we can only take that so far, and I would offer that we have been very fortunate that we are a community in which our real estate turns over. But should we, again, history doesn't show that we have really seen large recessions in our real estate market and turnover, but should that happen and other things happen, those are the scenarios I worry about. So I don't want community of Albany to be a situation in which some of our neighboring communities have found themselves in, where they are making major cuts, both at the school district or within departments. And I would also offer, clearly stated by members of the community, while I've been on council at least, that they miss many of the things that we as a city have provided in the past, that we have not provided recently because we were concerned about our fiscal health. So again, I don't always look at it as us potentially being in a deficit situation, but what opportunities are we setting aside to provide what the community has been asking for in the past and what we have provided in the past. Well, I will thank council members, thank members of the public for attending tonight to this special meeting, particularly staff for preparing this presentation. I really appreciate having all the information in one place. There are, of course, additional questions we have, but that's why we can always have more work sessions. So, thank you, staff.
Thank you.
I will look to council members and see if we want to take a short break now, or if we would like to try and charge through with a... let's take a 5-minute break, so we'll be back at 7:39.
I was saying that this next progressive meeting is 50 minutes, unless there's a lot of questions. I figured you would. I was like, surely you've answered all the questions you've been having before this. I used my brain.
All of Albany. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Vice Mayor, council members. I call this regular meeting of the Albany City Council to order. Let's see, Councilmember Tiedemann, would you read the land acknowledgement statement, please?
Yes. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lashawn. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home.
Thank you, Councilmember Tiedemann. City Clerk, can you please call roll?
Councilmember Hanson Romero.
Here.
Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
Councilmember Tiedemann.
Here.
Vice Mayor Lopez.
Here.
And Mayor Mickey.
Here. There were no closed sessions today, so there's no reports to be made on actions taken. Tonight, we have no ceremonial matters, so we'll move on to item 5, City Manager's Report. City Manager, may the council have your report.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to share a reminder that this week is an important week as we have a kickoff to our active transportation plan, which will be held via an open house on October 24th at the Albany Community Center. Please drop in anytime between the hours of 5:30 to 8 for an opportunity to weigh in on the goals for the plan and existing conditions for walking, biking, and rolling in Albany. As a reminder, we were also developing a web page shown on the screen here, which will be actively updated throughout the active transportation plan work. The short link to that is bit.ly/Albany ATP. Again, this is an ongoing process, lots of conversation throughout the planning opportunity and engaging with all of our partners, including the school district. So really look forward to building a robust plan together. We, as every year, are apparently approaching winter. Not today. Anyway, winter lawn field refresh is forthcoming. Our lawns certainly need it because they are so well loved in our city. This will include the ballpark fields, both at Memorial and Ocean View Parks. They'll be closed for annual maintenance beginning on November 4th. Our city staff and landscapers will be overseeding, aerating, and applying compost to them, as well as the lawn at Jules Terrace Park and the east side lawn at Memorial Park adjacent to the playground area. They'll be closed for about 3 months for treatment to allow the grass to grow again and get as healthy as possible for the new season. So please enjoy our other parks as these spaces undergo much needed refresh. The dog park will remain open through November, weather permitting. A reminder that November 5th is both slowly and quickly approaching, a very important day in our community for voting, and many of us have already received our ballots. We also understand that there's been some issue in getting the voter information guide, the bigger packet that comes with, which should come before your ballot is mailed to you, or at least in tandem. We do have and have sent out some information about ways that you can access this important content online. See it posted here on our website, albanyca.org/vote. And primarily, you would go to the Alameda County Registrar of Voters webpage. Registertovote.ca.gov is one of the ways, or acvote.org, which will take you to all of the election information, including all of the full information on each ballot measure. You can see the content is also on, of course, on our city webpage for each ballot measure as well. The city clerk's walking through what that looks like individually for each person. You need to fill in some information personal to you, obviously, and it will take you to your own voter profile and link you to the voter information guide. We understand from the Registrar of Voters office that these are in the mail. What that actually means, we'll see when they hit our mailboxes. So more follow-up is absolutely needed on that very concerning issue. As a reminder, we have a drop box here at City Hall in our back parking lot in the patio area to easily return your vote by mail ballot. Two important recaps from recent community events that were held in our city. The Albany Fire Department served over 850 breakfasts from 8 to noon on October 12th. It was one of our busiest pancake breakfasts. And again, wanted to reiterate and appreciate staff for being willing and able to quickly transition to sustainable foodware for this event by way of plates and utensils. And most importantly, the proceeds will be used to sponsor multiple children to attend the Alicia Ann Rush Camp recreational programs to really help those able to benefit from those camps. Also, we had a compost giveaway on the same day between 8 and 10:30 in the morning. Almost the same total. The city gave away 810 bags of compost. Very interesting. Anyway, so this was, again, a really popular event in our community and very encouraging because, as we all know, compost helps with all the issues that have been noted many times here at the dais and in our community with regard to sustainability, environmental protection, and climate change. And that actually concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager. Looking to council for questions.
Actually, if I could just offer another resource, given that the voter information guide for Alameda County, which covers Albany's elections, hasn't arrived. In addition to the one that the clerk put up, thank you, clerk. You can go to vote411.org, which is a resource that is put together by the League of Women Voters. And it's a little bit easier to use. You don't have to enter as much information. As soon as you go to it, it asks your address, and you just put in your address, and it'll take you to all the contests that are on your ballot. So that's another possible resource.
Thank you, Councilmember Jordan. Any other questions from council members? I'm not seeing any questions from council members. Any comments from members of the public?
Go ahead, Jeremiah.
Thank you, Ann. This question is for the city manager regarding, you were talking about the grass, all this grass that I guess potentially needs to be mowed or cut, like that. It was the bullet point you were talking about before the elections. You were talking about the grass and everything. I'm wondering if the last city council meeting, if the, what is it? The lawnmowers that for was it $80,000? 82, 88, or 70,000? I forget. It was like $80,000 the city spent on buying a lawnmower. I was wondering how many electric lawnmowers they got, because Home Depot has the 4-acre one on sale for $5,000. So buying green electric lawnmowers for $5,000 each that mow 4 acres? Or where did all that $80,000 go for the?
Hi, this is Margie Marks. I was prepared to speak 3 minutes, so I'm surprised to see it's 1 minute. I'm not sure when that changed, but I want to address short-term rentals.
Margie, Margie,
What?
this
Yes?
is time for comments or questions about the city manager's report. We have
Oh,
not
I'm
gotten to
sorry.
Good of the City yet. And
Okay,
Good of the
thank
City,
you.
Good of the City, I do insist you'll have 3 minutes. I'm not seeing any other public comments. Any council members' discussion?
I just want to say I attended the pancake breakfast and it was fabulous. So I thank all of city staff and our fire department for putting that on. So
I was just going to offer, I just looked up the ride-on motor electric mower cost, and it was $40,000 approximately, not the number that was stated by the commenter.
I too attended the pancake breakfast. It was wonderful. Thank you to the firefighters for putting on a wonderful breakfast. Let's see. Really encourage all those that can and are able to attend the ATP kickoffs, the Active Transportation Kickoff, this October 24th. And with that, we will move on to Good of the City. On Good to the City, this is for attendees to provide the council comments, information, and questions on items that is not on the agenda. Please raise your hands now if you're in the room and online. See, we've got 3 people in the room, 4 people, and then how many online?
One with raised hand.
Okay. So we'll go with 3 minutes. By state law, known as the Brown Act, the council cannot discuss items that are not on the agenda except under extraordinary circumstances. Rather, items raised may be referred to a future agenda or to staff for comment. And with that, we'll go with 3 minutes, starting inside the council chambers.
I have Stephen Alpert, Stemek, and Bob Otis, if you can go one after another. Thank you.
Yes. Good evening. I'm Dr. Stephen Alpert. At the last council meeting, my wife and I reviewed the blatant lie by Community Development Director Bond that state law precluded sending out citywide alerts for proposed new construction, and the months of non-response and obfuscation by Councilman Jordan and the city attorney as to why the city follows only the minimum state mandate of notifying those within 300 feet of new construction, regardless of project size, when in fact other California municipalities have enacted wider and varying notification areas to distinguish between small and large-scale projects. Councilman Jordan and the city attorney contend that 2 state laws, 65008 and 658539C3, might be construed to preclude a municipality from implementing different notification distances based on project size. Years of real-world experience indicate that these assertions are but hypothetical conjectures not supported by case law. More than 3 weeks ago, Albany city officials were provided with the verbatim comments of my email exchanges with Michael Forbes, Community Development Director of the City of Beverly Hills. In response to my questions about Beverly Hills' practice of using 500 and 1,000 feet notification since 2014, and whether this practice had ever resulted in any legal challenges, Director Forbes replied, quote, "It is not uncommon for cities to have different noticing requirements depending on the type or size of project and depending on the decision-making authority. And, quote, I spoke with a few of my colleagues, and to our knowledge, our requirements have not been challenged." In marked contrast to the months of non-responsiveness and obfuscation by Albany city officials, Beverly Hills Director Forbes provided next-day detailed responses to my specific questions, fully aware that I was not a resident of Beverly Hills. The responses forwarded by Director Forbes clearly refute the assertions by the City of Albany that state laws preclude different notification differences based on project size. Director Forbes has absolutely no reason not to be factual. Would any Albany city official care to respond or comment on the discrepancy between the use of varying notification for small and large-scale projects by other municipalities and Albany's contention that this practice would cause legal exposure? The practice of only notifying those within 300 feet clearly limits public discourse, allowing the council to push through new projects, no matter how inappropriate and or incongruous with the neighborhood, with minimal awareness and input from the public. I and several Albany residents have requested that the issue of 300 feet notification be submitted as a formal meeting agenda item to allow for extended, in-depth public discussion. For reasons unknown, the council has refused to do so. Thank you for the opportunity to address the council.
Thank you for your comments.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Tom Stymack. I think you probably recognize me from previous meetings. Those who have forgotten my background, I've been an Albany resident for 40-plus years. I'm a state licensed civil engineer and geotechnical engineer, and I have a business here in Albany for more than 20 years. During my time, I've worked with a lot of different residential projects, some in Albany, some not. And my perception is that the Albany homeowners vary with their ability and desire to learn about new projects or new developments. And I'm sure you're aware there are old residents like myself, young and new homeowners, or those that are just too busy. All of that changes when a major project development comes along or is proposed. And I think, as I pointed out last time, most of you will remember the Safeway project. That was on the boards for years and just didn't go very far. Dr. Albert has put forward what I think is a kind of a good way to go on this. And that would be to have the 300-foot set notification for small projects, windows, doors, maybe second-story addition. And keep in mind, 300 feet is one block. So from Ordway to Ventura is 300 feet. That's not very far. So when a large project comes along, maybe it warrants just going a step further. For me, it seems, to be honest, as an engineer and as a citizen, it seems to me to be a simple thing to create a committee that says, well, let's look at this. You're talking about, the Golden Gate Fields. There are going to be a lot more of these issues that come up then. But I think that would be a simple first step. Let the committee look at it. Let's see if it works. Let's see if our citizens like it. I've recently chatted with some older couples, and they're in favor of this. They're not pounding their hands, but they say, yeah, we would be interested if we're going to have a 5-story building put next to us 400 feet away. So anyway, I encourage you to consider that.
Thank you for your comments.
Rob, Mr. Ude, and then Francesco Papaleo.
Mr. Mayor and council members, this is a second meeting in a row, and I'll try not to make that a habit. But I did want to say that when I was here last week, I particularly was interested in the comments made by the folks about ballot language. And that brought back to me the experience of the Albany card room ballot measure, which some of you know I litigated. But in any event, so I pulled out the decision and this afternoon, and I think it's interesting to realize what a prior council actually did in collaboration with a property owner who was looking in a development. At the time, there was a Gaming Registration Act that required local approval in a ballot measure reading substantially as follows: shall card clubs in any game in which any games permitted by law, such as draw poker, low ball poker, and something else called pan, are played in the city or county of X. Ladbroke did a survey of Albany voters to find out what would appeal to them. And we ended up with a ballot measure approved by the city council, which said, shall a particular ordinance, a gaming ordinance, zoning modification, and development agreement as printed in the voter pamphlet be enacted to allow and regulate card room gaming at Golden Gate Fields, at which, and then they repeated the statutory language, in order to provide revenue for the city of Albany, that got Mr. Jordan apparently, create jobs, provide for an Albany Bay Trail, and allow Albany waterfront access. The court choked on that, even though they ultimately wimped out on relief and sent it back to decide whether or not it really made a difference. And we had a political scientist at Chico State who ran a survey of his own students with the neutral language for a card room in the student union, or one which would keep tuition down and do various other things, provide jobs for students and so forth. And lo and behold, it made a substantial difference in the outcome. But in any event, the court's opinion actually refers to how it is important for governmental entities not to engage in using overtly partisan language which favors one side of an issue or the other. So I just thought that was a nice little bit of history for you as you think about how you may go forward on the waterfront and Golden Gate Fields in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
I'm Francesco Papalia. According to a state treasurer's office report, the 68-unit affordable housing project at 755 Cleveland Avenue cost $61.8 million to build. I have supported this project since its inception. Using figures from the SAHA website, I calculated the average size unit is a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, 736 square foot space that costs basically $1 million to build. Nearby at 555 Pierce Street, an 1,100 square foot 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo with an upgraded kitchen and baths sells for about $550,000, with all the amenities like pools and tennis courts and hot tubs, and they all pay taxes. A 736 square foot rental should not cost $1 million to build. 2 condominiums at 555 Pierce could be bought with 50% more space and a second bath for only $50,000 more per unit than just the cost of 1 unit at 755 Pierce. Can we afford to subsidize this kind of affordable housing? The report states that the high cost per unit is due to rising commodity costs, prevailing wage requirements, earthwork for an unlevel site, noise mitigation, additional air filtration due to its proximity to freeway and rail right next to it. Prevailing wage means union wage. Contractors mark up a percentage of the wages, and therefore the higher cost the wages, the higher cost their profit, and the higher cost it is to us. Saha, the nonprofit developer, receives a $3 million developer fee. Isn't there a better way to provide publicly subsidized housing at a lower and more efficient cost? $1 million per unit is not the right number. I repeat that I have supported this project since its inception and with great anticipation for its completion. A fully detailed and public final report should be submitted about this $62 million project to the public upon the completion of the project. I have paraphrased the full text of my letter to the council, and a copy of it and the treasurer's report should be able to be viewed online. And I hope people understand that I'm for affordable housing, but $1 million a unit is just too much. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Hi, this is Margie Marks. I want to address short-term rentals. The tax for rentals under 30 days in Albany is 10%. I want you to raise it to 15%. Full disclosure, the state of California is implementing a 15% tax on short-term rentals beginning January 2025. The state money will establish an ongoing funding source for local governments to create low and middle income housing. So if you were to raise the tax to 15%, the total tax here in Albany for a short-term rental would be 30%. Will the market take that? After some research and my own personal experience, I would say yes. Forbes Advisor has a printed list of cities with what they call the worst Airbnb fees from 2023. These fees include taxes. Number 1, Atlanta, Georgia comes in first with 48% in fees. The California city with the largest fees on short-term rentals is number 35 on the list, a city that I've never heard of named Big Bear, where you're going to pay 39% in short-term rental fees. Los Angeles charges 14% in tax plus a $3.10 fee per night. San Francisco tax is 14%. Oakland tax is 14%. Berkeley is 12% plus a 2% enforcement fee and a $220 annual fee. My family and I just spent a few days at a hotel at a famous tourist attraction. There was a 15% occupancy tax, 4% city tourism tax, 1% state tourism tax, 4% Anaheim tourist improvement area tax, coming to 20%. We paid it, no questions asked. That's where we wanted to be, we paid it. Short-term rentals take long-term units off the market. I would ask one of you to please present this idea to the Finance Advisory Committee for research. I'd like for the extra money to be spent on housing, but I know that's not up to me. But I think that we are a small city. You know, the soda tax, we were the last city in the state to get the soda tax passed. After it passed in Albany, the soda tax industry got a law passed in Sacramento that you couldn't tax, do your local soda tax anymore. Please look into this before it's too late. And like I said, if you go on it's Forbes 2023 did this study, and this is the 39% in Big Bear is before we add the 15% state tax that'll take effect in January. So I would ask you to give this to the Finance Advisory Committee. I would also like you to ask them to look into what would be appropriate for landlords that are not registered and not paying the fees, and for short-term rental landlords who are not paying the fees. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Oh, wow. Really? Just myself and Margie for public comment? Okay. I'm shocked. I'm shocked in the city manager. Mayor, of course the mayor did the right thing. Compassion. Thank you for the victim. I'm sorry the city manager is quick to silence the voice of the victim of Golden Gate Fields. Isn't that kind of strange? Why is the city manager so defensive? You know, it was less than a second. He responded to Mayor Mickey. I think it was like 1 second. How did the city manager have an answer so quick and to turn down? I thought it was a great idea to honor the victim. Poor lady. boy, I see where the city manager's, she doesn't care about victims. The city manager doesn't care. But thank you, Mayor John Mickey, for your compassion. Thank you for your interest. That was really nice of you. I could tell you actually have a heart. I'm just curious why the city manager is so quick to respond, no, that doesn't pertain to this. It was an idea about the use of Golden Gate Field, city manager. I thought that's what the item was. I thought everybody's suggestion was noted. But why was my idea to represent the voices of the victims of violent crimes so quickly turned down? Even just a thought, even just the idea, the city manager so quick to turn down? No, her answer was just no. Quiet. And the reason is because there was another case in October 2022 in April, Albany Police case number 22-538. And the city manager is on defense mode right now. She was so quick to answer that. I feel, my opinion is because the media, the press has reached out to the city hall regarding this case. Regarding the abduction at the Albany Target in 2022, that was silenced and nobody knows about, that was covered up. And the police report record, the public report, why is the police not handing over the public records request right away to the media? What's been covered up? What is everybody hiding? 2-538.
Any other online commenters? Not seeing any other online commenters. Going back, let's see if you go to the city.
I may offer something, Mayor. Yeah, so the section of the government code that I cited, which is 65008, that's California Government Code. It was signed into law in 2023. So jurisdictions that have differences in noticing requirements that predate that may not be current with the law. That particular law prohibits cities from discriminating against different projects based on their size.
Councilmember Tiedemann?
Thank you. I'll just note for the comment about the cost of affordable housing, as I noted in my response to that email, and for anyone interested, they can look for some context on that. If they search Bay Area Affordable Housing Pipeline, May 2024, Enterprise Community Partners put together a study of the pipeline of affordable housing for BAFA that we heard and ABAG heard a couple months ago, that looks at the average cost per unit and shows that we are not very far out of line here. So this is not a unique thing to Albany. So if anyone's interested, I encourage them to take a look at that report.
Trying to decide if I'm allowed to add more to that. I will just note, being cautious of not getting into a discussion, that any new construction, my experience has been any new construction of affordable or market rate housing usually greatly outpaces the cost of a renovation of an existing building or the renovation of an existing unit. And in my experience, that is one of the most important reasons for communities to find ways of preserving naturally occurring affordable units of housing. And I think a local example that has recently happened is the conversion of motels to affordable housing. So with that, I will thank everyone for their public comments and go to the city. We'll move on to item 7, consent calendar. On the consent calendar, items on the consent calendar are considered to be routine by the City Council and will be enacted by one motion. By approval of the consent calendar, the staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified by the City Council. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a City Council member or a member of the audience requests removal items from the consent calendar. Would any council members like to discuss an item or remove an item from the consent calendar? Not seeing any council members. Are there any members of the public that would like to pull an item for discussion?
Yes. I have one in the room and one online.
Right. Which item?
7-3 for in the room. I'm not sure about the online.
Okay, perfect.
Hi, Brian Martin, Albany resident. I see the item on the city records to pay the Albany Lions Club $1.53 million. We heard from the city attorney at the previous city council meeting that the settlement resolves the constitutional issue of the cross in our public park. I'm grateful to this and other recent city councils to finally have the issue resolved, and resolved in a way that preserves public parkland. A lot of time and effort has gone into this by city staff, city council members, and members of the public, but it's a result that, like a capital expense, benefits the community for many, many years to come. As I and others have said before, and the court ruled earlier this year, the individual members of the Lions Club have the right to worship as many or as few gods as they wish, but the club itself is not a religious nonprofit, not a religious institution, does not itself worship, and its bylaws forbid even debating sectarian religion. How did we get to this point? The city, with Lions Club member Hubert Call on the city council in 1970s, negotiated a deal with Call himself and a developer to have the Calls sell the property with the cross on it to the developer, and the developer give the land to the city in exchange for the city changing the zoning on the developer's land on Pierce Street, issuing lucrative permits to build there. At that time, Hubert Call gifted an easement on his 1.1 acre parcel to the Albany Lions Club, granting his club access to maintain the cross. The city was advised on the legality of the details of the deal by its own attorney, who I've heard was also an Albany Lions Club member. When challenges to the complex land deal were resolved in the courts in 1985 with the ruling against Hubert Call for abusing the power of his office, my understanding is that at that time, current Albany Lions lawyer Bob Nichols was one of 2 Albany Lions Club members on the city council, which could have then acted to address concerns about the cross and its easement, but did not. I've never seen the Albany Lions Club apologize for the key roles, as explained above, it played in getting us, the city, into this mess. I have seen a post on social media where one Albany resident was concerned that people on recent city councils, quote unquote, push their agenda and their ideology to remove the cross. For me, it's hard to imagine a city council more forceful of its own ideology than the one in the 1970s that established its favored religion in a public park, broadcasting its message of favoritism for some residents over others for the decades that followed. City councils over the past 8 years, more recent city councils, and the Lions Club said in court that they were in agreement with the court that the situation could not continue because it was violating Albany residents' constitutional rights to have a city government free from religious favoritism. In that end, I noticed the city did what it could to right the wrongs of its past, to make this as economical as possible, while adhering to the voters' 1996 Measure R mandate to preserve and purchase public parkland, not sell public parkland. The last I checked, the Albany Lions Club was incorporated as a non-religious nonprofit in the city of El Cerrito, which for years before Zoom held its regular meetings in El Cerrito and had officers from all over the Bay Area, including as far away as Walnut Creek. Meanwhile, the Albany Lions Club was working in the courts to try to force the city of Albany to sell our parkland to them, and when that wasn't successful, demanding in court that the city pay roughly $1.5 million of our tax dollars, triple what the city's appraiser said it was worth. It seems to me that people with concerns about the cost to us taxpayers and concerns about how we got to this point should consider addressing the Lions Club and ask them how they plan to serve the residents of Albany with these funds. Thank you so much for your work on this.
Thank you for your comments.
Yeah, I know it's for 7-3 and 7-4. Yeah, so 7-3, yeah, about the Lions Club. I remember I was a Leo when I was in Albany High School. It was like an extracurricular activity or something. It was, Leo was like a young lion kind of thing. I remember we had our meetings over in El Cerrito. Yeah, it was El Cerrito at that Denny's right there on, is that Cutting in San Pablo or Potrero in San Pablo? You know, I'll just leave it at that. 7-4. I was wondering the grants Is the city manager the only person that can apply for grants? Or do we have like a staff person and that's what they specialize in? That would be great if we could apply for a grant. There's no dollar amount on these grants. And I noticed that 2026, so is that money like basically retroactive? We're not going to get any of that money for 2 or 3 years if it gets awarded. But yeah, go ahead and apply for it. Yeah, got the green light. Apply for all the grants you can apply for. Apply for all of them. Yeah, that's about it there. So I was just wondering next time on this 7-4, if there could be a dollar amount. Because I mean the grant, here it says, you know, a dollar amount, potential dollar amount. Like, why would the city even apply for a grant if the city doesn't even know how much it is? It could be $1, right? So why would the city even waste your time applying for a grant for $1? So you know what the numbers are. You know how what the grant is. So let's be transparent. You know, transparency, city manager, or whoever does these reports. Maybe I can click on a link. Maybe I overlook something, but I'm reading the paper that's sitting in the back table at the city hall as what's given to the public for review. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any discussion, council members? City manager, apologies, I don't have the backup on 7-4. Was there a dollar amount listed in 7-4?
I'll have our staff speak to that directly. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Hi, Justin Freed, Transportation and Sustainability Manager. Often our staff reports when we're seeking requests for funding for grants are to have us go and work on the grant request, and we don't always have the numbers. But for this one, Alameda CTC does request in your resolution that is in the action, the dollar amount listed, and it's $515,000.
Thank you.
I move the consent calendar, if that's all right.
Seconded.
Councilmember Tiedemann,
Yes.
Councilmember Hanson Romero,
Yes.
Councilmember Jordan,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Lopez,
Yep.
and Mayor Mickey.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you, everyone. We'll move on to item, let's see, we have no presentation tonight or public hearings. We'll move on to item 10, unfinished business, energy efficiency and conservation block grant award and outreach consultant contract. Seth?
Hello, council members. This is Michelle Plaus. I'm the Community Development Analyst. It's really nice to see you all before 10 p.m. tonight. And I think Anne is pulling up my presentation. So I have a relatively short presentation for you tonight. This is all in reference to the gas line decommissioning pilot project that we spoke about last May. So just as a brief refresher, the goal of this pilot project is to eventually decommission a section of gas pipeline covering about 1 city block and electrify all of the connected buildings. And the project will involve significant and in-depth community outreach with several pilot sites. We've selected 12 based on the gas line, properties themselves, and we had discussion last May about kind of prioritizing between those. And we'll be working closely with the community to try to get 100% of the building owners on one of those blocks to agree to the project. Next slide, please. I won't go into all the details of what we've done on this project, but the highlights are that last October, we received a grant, the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant, or EECBG. This is a $200,000 grant from the U.S. Department of Energy. And since that time, we've been working with the DOE on, getting all of the paperwork finished and figuring out the details of the plan and the goals and all of those kinds of logistical things. And then we also have been doing some of the other groundwork. In particular, we had a discussion with the council in May of this year, like I said, talking about site prioritization between those 12 potential pilot sites. Some highlights from that discussion were a focus on equity and learning from the project, and then also in particular looking for blocks that had a lot of multifamily buildings and renters. There's lots more detail that we'll be getting into in a lot of detailed discussion with our consultants, but those are just some highlights for our memory. And then the latest is that in October of this year, just a few weeks ago, that grant award from the DOE was finalized. And they completed all of the work they had to do with their finance people and actually awarded those funds to us. The exact way that they did that was a little bit unusual. Rather than an award contract or a grant contract, they actually sent us a document of terms and conditions. And so rather than authorizing the grant contract, it's actually authorizing staff to acknowledge the terms and conditions. So I'll get back to that language when I talk about our recommendations, but that's just the slightly different thing than usual. So we finalized the grant there, and then the other piece that we've been working on is getting our consultants in place. The grant that we received, we're planning to use to fund 2 consultants to help us with the project, and the first of those is our outreach and engagement consultants, and that's the other piece that we've brought tonight. The process for selecting that consultant started early this summer with the release of an RFQ. We received 4 really great responses to that RFQ, and we did, an in-depth review of the responses. We did follow-up interviews and also reference checks with a selection committee that was comprised of staff working on the project, including our partners at Stop Waste, and also a climate action committee representative. And we had unanimous agreement that the best choice for the project was Environmental Justice Solutions. Next slide, please, Ann. More commonly known as EJ Solutions. We were really impressed by their focus on really deep engagement and long-term community building, which we felt like was a really good fit for this project. And they also had a really strong emphasis on equitable outreach and some really, impressive strategies for achieving that in practice, including a very diverse staff with a range of cultural competencies. And they also had some previous experience with gas line decommissioning outreach, in particular, with a research project that was done by GridWorks and Ava Community Energy about a year or 2 ago. So we felt like they were a really good fit for this project, and that contract has been put into your packet for this agenda item. Next slide, please, Ann. The scope of work for that contract pretty much reflects the scope of work for the grant agreement itself, or the grant itself, with a few little differences because they're not doing all of the work. We will have the second consultant focusing on those electrification assessments. But the phases of work are outreach planning, conducting the outreach itself, preparing for electrification assessments, so kind of laying that groundwork and getting agreements from building owners to allow them to bring in the second consultants to actually assess what needs to be done in each home to electrify it. The negotiation and agreements of actually trying to get everyone on the block to agree to the project and getting to that 100% threshold that we've spoken about. And then finally, reporting. We have a series of reports and toolkits that we want to put together, both to kind of express the story of how this project went and what we learned, and also to help other cities or jurisdictions that might be looking towards similar things. So with that, there are 2 recommendations for the council tonight, both adopting resolutions. The first would authorize the city manager to acknowledge the terms and conditions of the EECBG grant for this gas line decommissioning pilot project. As I mentioned, it's acknowledging terms and conditions rather than a normal grant contract. And then the second resolution authorizes the city manager to execute contract C-2454 with Environmental Justice Solutions for the professional services related to the pilot project outreach. And with those two actions, staff will then be able to start actually receiving the money from the Department of Energy and working with the consultants to develop our more specific outreach plan.
Thank you, staff, for the report. Looking to council for any questions.
Is there anything in those terms and conditions that staff sees as issues?
No, I don't think so. There are a few pieces of it that, require, prevailing wage and, there's like Buy America, Build America requirements that are relatively new, but our project is actually exempt from all of the more intense requirements like that because we're not doing any actual construction in this part of the project, funded by this grant. So, those were the main ones we were looking at that might, be more of a requirement for reporting, but we're exempt from those. I'll pass to Mala if there was anything else.
And I know that we're looking for specific areas as the pilot projects. I'm just curious, like, if there was some sort of like general outreach to see how many people just already would be an ideal candidate or an ideal source. Do we have data on that? Like, do we know?
No, we don't. We have some data on the buildings on these various blocks and, some of the permit data from that about, there are some buildings that have had a little bit of electrification done or that sort of thing, but we haven't done any surveys of the residents on the blocks or anything. I'd say that's something that we plan to start thinking about in more detail once we have completed once we've finalized the contract with EJ Solutions, so that we can kind of talk about the outreach plan and what those different methods might look like to get answers like that.
Again, because we know 555 Pierce is all electric, that building in particular.
Mm. Oh, I see. Oh, so yeah, in terms of thinking about gas lines specifically that might be a good location, the way that we went about that was I actually got a map from PG&E of all the gas lines in the city and then narrowed those down based on criteria related to the kind of the hydrological feasibility of cutting off the line, like where it is in the grid. And so that cut down a lot, as you would imagine. There are a lot of places in the city where if you try to cut off a section, it's going to cause some issues. So that's the main thing. And then there were some other qualifiers related to sections that are kind of sooner on the list for replacement or repair, where we'd be kind of preventing a project from taking place. So that's the criteria that we used rather than looking at areas that would be particularly easy to complete electrification in. Theoretically, we could try to reopen that discussion, but yeah, at the moment, that's how we've gotten to this list of 12.
Okay, great. I just was curious how that was being done. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hanson Romero. Not seeing any other council questions, I'll open it up for public comment. Not seeing any public comment in the room. Do we have any public comment online?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Clay.
Yeah, I followed this a little bit in May. It didn't appear that at the previous meeting you discussed what the actual sites, the actual 12 sites. I think the data was anonymized. I don't think that data should be exempt from a Public Records Act request, so why not just, have you stated what those sites, which blocks that we're talking about? Is that in some report that I missed? That's my question.
Yeah, thanks, Ann. Yeah, I was wondering, what are the 12 locations, or where are the 12 locations in your professional presentation? Is there a slide you could put up on the board of like a map of Albany that like outlines the 12 locations for the public to see what you're talking about?
Going back to staff, so both public commenters were asking if there is either a list or a map of locations, of the 12 locations.
We haven't published the actual locations themselves to the public as of yet. They're actually technically still under NDA from PG&E, and so we're working with them to kind of talk about exactly what the requirements will be about publishing those. There are some state laws and other rules about exactly what kind of information is made public related to utilities and things like that. So we're still working on that, so they haven't been published at this time.
And I think everyone knows what an ND is, but I'll just, non-disclosure agreement, so.
Thank you.
Not seeing any other public comment, I'll bring it back to council for discussion.
I'll thank staff for the work to get us here and move both resolutions with staff's recommendation.
I'll just comment. Oh, well, I'll second, but I'd like to thank staff for the work. Since for a contractor UC that's grants from DOE, I feel for you. I've had it take as long as a year before, so thank you for sticking with it, and I'm thrilled about the particular consultant and that they actually have actual experience. That's pretty remarkable. Then I will just end with, I saw on the California Building Decarbonization list that I believe it was the County of Marin Board of Supervisors just adopted a full electrification plan for the whole county. So there might be some interesting information in there, and they might be interested in some way participating, even contributing to this effort, since we're ahead of them on that.
We have a second.
Vice Mayor Lopez,
Yep.
Mayor Mickey,
Yes.
Councilmember Hanson Romero,
Yes.
Councilmember Jordan,
Yes.
Councilmember Tiedemann.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you, everyone. I will second, or I will, again, thank staff for all their efforts in this. I was a little bit confused why it was a terms and conditions, so I'm thankful that you explained that. I'm glad that we don't have to follow all the onerous rules, and I'm super excited about where this project may lead. We have no new business tonight, so we'll move on to item 12, council subcommittee reports, council member reports on appointed representation of Albany and other meetings and events. And we'll look to this end of the dais this week.
I have no updates today.
Thank you, Council Hanson Romero.
Yeah, you get the name right here, Planning, Policy, and Legislation Committee of the Alameda County Transportation Commission met. It considered the countywide transportation plan policy blueprint. So this is for the next countywide transportation plan, which would guide what is funded in the next cycle. And I've mentioned before, seeking to get consideration of sidewalks into the plan, which has not previously been in any one of these plans. And success so far. It does include that. One of the main objectives, there's 4 objectives, is safety policy objectives. And then within that, one of the goals is prioritize vulnerable users, and it says prioritize safety enhancements on roadways, sidewalks, and streetscapes of vulnerable users, people walking, biking, and rolling. So I look forward to you continuing to press the charge as that goes forward when you take over there if the council should choose to appoint you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Lopez?
Just reporting quickly, we had our monthly ACMAD meeting last week. Nothing major out of there this time around, and no scares yet, knock on wood, regarding mosquitoes in Albany. I think our community been doing very well with being resilient, but also making appropriate service calls when necessary. And I just want to put in my plug. ACMAD is there as a resource for anyone who's still listening right now at this moment. If there are mosquitoes, please give them a call and make sure we keep our community safe. Oh, and I went to the pancake breakfast. I did see Mayor Mickey there. My chief of staff was there, and unfortunately, he decided to say his new word, truck. That comes out very wrong when he says it. Had quite the time in front of the fire captain with that one.
Councilman Tiedemann.
Yes, I've got one. We had an ABAG housing meeting where our main item was a report on the effectiveness and uses of the regional housing technical assistance that ABAG gave out as part of their REAP funding from the state, which is a bevy of resources, local grants, data sources, and regional trainings, as well as county planning collaboratives that allowed discussion during the housing element creation process, which was all very, very useful and a great resource that ABAG provides. I also want to give kudos to our planning director, Jeff Bond, who served on the evaluation team for that project, and that was not an example of being one person from every city. That was a 4-person job. So Jeff was the only person from a city who was a planning director who was on that. I don't know where he found the time, but I very much appreciate his efforts there.
Thank you, Councilmember Tiedemann. I attended the Alameda County Mayor's Conference. It was actually held in the Berkeley Marina this past month. Berkeley shared a homelessness task force policy guidance that was created by the city of Berkeley, but the hope was that the guidance and task force would be more applicable to the entire county, so that the framework of guidance in terms of the approach, the various approaches, because it was not an approach to tackling homelessness, could be more a unified effort across the entire county, so that jurisdictions would be working from kind of the same game plan. So that was interesting to hear about and see. The other major topic was East Bay Parks came to talk about their 90th anniversary, but their primary focus was about wildfire mitigation, which I'm very thankful for the efforts they've done, given the past fire that happened this past week in Oakland, and how they have changed their approach to wildfire management. So they have gone through and within a quarter mile of any public accessible street, they have gone through and analyzed the important areas to go ahead and remove brush, and they're often doing that with goats and llamas. I will say that I drove through the Tilden Park the other day, and I saw the goats and the llama. I only saw one llama, so I'm not sure if it's llamas or llama. But the other thing that they're doing is they're using what's called a carbonizer. So they're, as they take down eucalyptus trees, which are kind of at kind of the end of their lifespan, they're able to on-site carbonize that wood and then place the carbonized wood back out in the environment, where it both stabilizes the earth but also provides long-term nutrients. And so that's a great way of them not having to use fuel to ship that wood out somewhere else where it would get composted. So that was really quite awesome to hear about. I was wondering if we could borrow that machine for Albany Hill as we approach our tree management plan, knowing that something will have to happen with the trees that come down. I also attended the annual League of California Cities conference. It was a great conference. A lot of our, actually there were members of our staff there, but there were also, it was great to see other elected and city government employees at the conference. There was one resolution that was brought forth to the entire group for which I was a voting member, a policy change for the league with regards to holding state legislators to the same rules as local officials. And so that was a request for a policy change, a motion, sorry, for a policy change that for the League of California Cities to advocate for that. There was a little bit of a snafu. We spent more time waiting as they counted the number of representatives that were in the room than we did actually voting. It turned out we were 17 people short at the initial count to have a ratification. During the process, about another 5 people were found, but we did not make it to a majority in attendance. As such, the measure did pass, but it means that it goes to the board of directors for their decision-making and then perhaps becoming policy. If you want to join California League of Cities, like we get to, attend quite fun things. Long Beach was wonderful, but the resolution policy took about 35 minutes, about 20 minutes of it we were waiting as they counted, and everyone was like, please, please, please let us make the minimum, but did not happen. So to the other end of that, I would say to those cities that were not in attendance, who did not send their representative, that's not a very democratic process when you don't show up. With that, we also, I mentioned the pancake breakfast I attended. We also have a report from Peggy McQuaid, who attended wait a minute, sorry, I've got the wrong email open. Who attended the, sorry, I'm very lost here. Sorry, the Housing Authority of Alameda County, and her document is attached. Is there anything that you would like to add? All right, thank you. Any questions for Peggy? No questions for Peggy? Okay. So with that, I'll ask for any public comment. Not seeing any public comment in the room, no public comment online. We'll move on to future agenda items. Are there any items that council would like, sorry, public comment, any future agenda items? Anyone for public comment? Any council members that would like to bring something forward for discussion? I was, during Good of the City, a member of the public raised short-term rental tax rates. I would be interested in understanding how, and the member of the public represented some of the tax rates in other jurisdictions. I would be interested in understanding how our tax rate is, how it compares to neighboring communities around us and neighboring communities of similar size. Again, this is generally speaking in an effort to understand how our tax rate competitive is to other communities. I bring that as a future agenda item that I would be interested in hearing about. With that, we'll move on to 14, announces city meetings and events. If you open up today's agenda, you can see future items happening within the city, always wonderful and exciting things happening in the city. I do really want to emphasize the active transportation plan, the kickoff meeting. Now is the time to get your ideas out there about where the city's future will be in terms of active transportation. With that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you all who took part in today's meeting. If you or a loved one is experiencing thoughts of suicide, a mental health or substance use crisis, or any other kind of emotional distress, call or text 988 to speak to a trained crisis specialist. Thank you, everyone, and with that, our meeting is adjourned.